Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and let me, for the avoidance of doubt, report to Parliament my interest in the scheme by displaying my old person's bus pass, which I have used on ministerial business so far some 200 times, thus saving the public purse probably some money. It is a bit incestuous, as Mr Johnson has just pointed out, since my budget is paying the 73.6% of the cost, so I can at least claim to have saved the 26.6%, which would otherwise have been paid or thereabouts. I start by congratulating Charlie Gordon on, as ever, a well-informed and well-researched contribution to today's debate. I welcome the opportunity for the first time since his appointment to, if you like, lock horns with him on a subject of significant interest. I also congratulate him but encourage him to even greater efforts. Had he added a mere 30 further words to his lengthy motion, he would have filled the entire page of the business bulletin instead of leaving just a little bit for me to appear on the... yes, I will.
Charlie Gordon.
But aware that I was literally taking a leaf out of the book of his colleague Angela Constance.
Minister.
Well, indeed, I think Leonard Cheshire probably had something to do with the drafting of it as well. But it is a serious matter, Presiding Officer, and it is good that we are having this discussion. Charlie Gordon, in his speech, I think quite properly delineated much of the history of how we've got here. I think the introduction of the national scheme was something that I commended at the time the previous administration for, and I continue to support as a minister. And one of the good things that we have been able to do in the review that we've just completed is to be able to say unambiguously that we will continue to support the scheme in the form in which it has been introduced. I think it is a scheme that has very clearly delivered an enormous amount of benefits to people across Scotland. It is a scheme that, being a national scheme with absolute certainty of provision, that helps the bus companies in their planning because they know the rate right across Scotland they're getting. I think in that respect the scheme is much better than the scheme south of the border, which is off-peak only, has different rates of reward across England, and is one that administratively is really quite difficult to administer. And of course we note that in yesterday's pre-budget report the Chancellor has said that in England the scheme will be amended by aligning eligibility with the forthcoming changes in state pension age. So therefore, in future in England, under yesterday's announcement, people aged 60 will not be entitled to enter the English scheme. For the avoidance of doubt, that's on page 110 of the pre-budget report. So the gap between the excellent scheme that we have in Scotland, in which we are committed to sustaining and maintaining, and what's going on south of the border will increase. Our scheme enables older and disabled people to continue to travel for free throughout Scotland at any time on any scheduled bus route for any number of journeys, and therefore it's a scheme that in these difficult economic times in particular delivers huge benefit to many families and in particular pensioners during a time of difficulty. And of course it maintains social cohesion, something that Charlie Gordon made reference to in his remarks. He talked about the number of journeys, some 158 million, and by the way, I'm not going to pick at the numbers, Presiding Officer. I think Mr Gordon basically got them right. He only made one mistake. I can't resist the temptation that the reimbursement is actually on the standard fare, not the average fare. Now, actually, there is something quite important in that because, of course, you will see not unreasonably that the bus companies have tended to raise standard fares at a slightly greater rate than other fares, which, of course, is ensured that they protect the revenue from the concessionary bus scheme. But that is part of the ongoing discussion that we're having with the CPT about reimbursement rates. Because, of course, our 73.6% reimbursement rate is substantially more generous than the one that is in England and Wales. It still incorporates an allowance for the start-up costs of the scheme, and that's why we have commissioned consultants to look at whether the scheme reimbursement rate properly meets the test of no better off, no worse off. Charlie Gordon, of course, discussed the issue of marginal cost of carrying extra passengers versus the present scheme, which essentially looks at the full cost. And I think there is a proper debate to be had there. The CPT would say to us, and do say to us, of course, that they have put on extra capacity, they have used the opportunity to invest in new buses, and I think there is some merit in that. But it's certainly the case that we have to look at getting the balance right, reflecting the fact that we have now got that start-up cost out of the way and establishing for the way forward what is the right reimbursement rate. That's a discussion we'll have. 3 years on, with a review completed, we can see how successful the scheme has been, but we also can see the nature of the challenge that we have to have. I think the previous government and ourselves should be proud of the scheme that delivers so much for the people of Scotland. Reference was made, of course, to ferry journeys and to rail discounts that are provided at a local level, and of course it is still open for local authorities to provide local support to holders of the card or otherwise as they see fit. And before we had the national scheme, we had 6 out of the 16 authorities across Scotland who provided support to people on the lower rate of disability living allowance. Now, of course, we don't know what the future of the DLA is going to be. It is one of the benefits that is being considered for reform or abolition. I hope that whatever follows provides appropriate support for people with disabilities. That's very important. The current scheme, of course, comes in 2 parts, a care component and a mobility component. And it is that mobility component paid by Westminster that is important to people on disability living allowance. Some people have suggested to me that, of course, one of the ways in which one might be more readily able to structure support for people on lower level DLA would be to transfer the funding for that part of the DLA to Scotland and to consider that as a way in which we can fund different ways of supporting people on DLA. That's not a matter the government is yet engaged on, but it is something that's been raised in the debate. We have, of course, moved into territory of a continuing ageing population. Hopefully many of them remain, as I am, relatively fit, although in possession of a bus pass, able therefore to travel, to meet friends, to meet families. Charlie Gordon, I think, possibly stretched the use of parliamentary terms. He used the word geek. Thankfully, the presiding officer does not rule that's unparliamentary language. I wear the badge of geekdom with pride and will continue to do so. I thought Charlie Gordon, presiding officer, put a bit of a hostage to fortune by suggesting there might have been a cock-up in the original establishment of the scheme. I would be more gentle and say that I think some of the long-term effects of the scheme that we have emerged over the time. He made the good point, 42% of car owners using the scheme to reduce their driving. I include myself in that, albeit I'm probably doing too much driving even now. On the subject of community transport and demand-responsive transport, my motion in March 2006, when we debated it, welcomed the formation of Transport Scotland as a way to promote new ideas, and I think that continues to be the case. We have, of course, looked at the options for including community transport in the existing scheme, and there are 1 or 2 who run scheduled services who can qualify. It is a complex issue. If we were to make it free, I'm sure that it would be well used. It would certainly require significant raising of capability and capacity in the community transport world. I move that amendment.